We'll say good morning. Our shir this morning is dedicated by Baruch Fishel and Sonia Kozlovsky and Henry and Barbara Rosenbaum and all of her children and great-grandchildren in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Sonia and Henry's mother, Ruth Rosenbaum, Rachel Bas Herschel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Neshama has an aliyah. Amen. And by the Schoenfelds, in honor of the birth of a grandson to Ari and Shoshana Lerner, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. To Shira and to Shmuley Berglas. When is this morning?
Yeah, 2 hours.
2 hours ago. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. We should be Zocha. Lachniso bervisal Sharm Avinu Bizmano and the Gadol the Torah the Chopel Masim Tovim. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. All right, Tavosai, let's begin. Daf Dalid Amud Aleph. Daf Dalid Amud Aleph. So we're picking up 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down from the top. So what says the Gemara? Ravashi said, Hamari. So we're still discussing over here about whose opinion the Mishnah reflects. Because remember, the Mishnah required both ksiva as well as chasima lishma. So says the Gemara. So we're trying to figure out if it's Rabbi Meir or if it is Rabbi Elazar. So remember again, the Gemara so far has pointed out that according to Rabbi Meir, you need chasima lishma. If it's according to Rabbi Eliezer, you need ksiva lishma. But we're trying to find a Tana ultimately who requires both. So Ravashi said, Hamani, whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Yehudahi. It is Rabbi Yehuda. Disnan, Rabbi Yehuda posel, ad shetehei kesivaso b'chasimaso b'tolosh. We'll say because Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion in the Mishnah that we stated before that if you're writing a get on something that is mechuber lekarka, so Rabbi Yehuda says that the get is possible until the point that the ksiva and chasima is bitalosh. Meaning, Rabbi said that, remember, this was the case, you're writing the get, that's saying that it's mechuber lekarka, so you have to go out according to Rabbi Yehuda and detach it, and write everything and sign it only once it's detached. So that sounds like, again, Rabbi Yehuda clearly requires that the ksiva and the chasima be lishma, to which the Gemara says, meikara, my time lo mukmin like Rabbi Yehuda. So if that's the case, why didn't we try to establish this like Rabbi Yehuda from the beginning? This seems so pasha that Rabbi Yehuda requires ksiva chasim l'shma. Why did we go through all of these? Why did we jump through all of these hoops in order to go ahead and see if we could align to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir? Why did we just say from the beginning like Rabbi Yehuda? To which the Gemara says, Mahajina Rabbi Meir, because at first we tried to establish it like Rabbi Meir, the Stam Masnisin Rabbi Meir. Because also we have a general concept that a Stam Mishnah is in accordance with the view of Rabbi Meir. Therefore, again, whenever possible, we try to establish the Mishnah like Rabbi Meir. Next, therefore, when that didn't work, Mahajinan Rabbi Elazar, the Kaimalon Hilchosa Kavase begin. And yet, again, if that didn't work, we tried to establish ourselves like Rabbi Elazar, because again, we have a general principle that when it comes to Hilchos Gittin, Stam Halacha Kavase de Rabbi Elazar. That Rabbi say again, generally the halacha follows Rabbi Elazar in terms of Gittin. Therefore, again, when trying to understand authorship of our Mishnah, we first try to establish it like Rabbi Meir. When that doesn't work, we try to go like Rabbi Elazar. And when neither of those work, then we establish it like Rabbi Yehuda. Tanan. So that seems to be, by the way, the bottom line over here. So bottom line, the Mishnah seems to reflect, we have a couple of possibilities. Either possibility one is that, in fact, it does reflect the view of Rabbi Elazar, and even though Rabbi Elazar only requires ksiva lishma, that's true only if you don't have Eidim signing. But once you do have Eidim signing, Rabbi Elazar would require that the Eidim sign lishma. That's possibility one. Possibility two is that the Mishnah in fact reflects the view of Rabbi Yehuda, namely that halacha l'maisa you need ksiva as well as chasima lishma. So says the Gemara, Tnan, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Af hamevi min harakem umin achager. So now we're going to get into an interesting discussion. So Rabbi Gamliel said that even one who brings from Rekem and Cheger has to say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. The Rabbi say, B'pashtos Rekem and Cheger, were border cities, Teretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, afilu mikfar ludim lelud. Rabbi Eliezer said, even from Kfar Ludim to Lud, which Rabbi says seemed to be again Kfar Ludim. Rashi said was in Chutz La'aretz. Lud was in Eretz Yisrael, and they were very close to each other. But nevertheless, you would have to say B'fanei nechtam afu b'fanei nechtam if you were bringing from one to the other. V'amar Abaye, and Abaye said, Ba'ayoros hasmuchos li Eretz Yisrael umuvlaos b'tchum Eretz Yisrael askinan. And Abaye said that what are we dealing with over here? We're dealing with cities that are close to Eretz Yisrael and muvlaos, absorbed in the tchum of Eretz Yisrael. I will say, now just to talk for a moment about these muvlaos for just a moment. So I will say, understand that the borders of Eretz Yisrael are not straight lines. So you had in certain places where the border of Eretz Yisrael would essentially, I don't know what the right geographic term is, but it would bend inwards. You know what I mean? So if you could imagine for a moment, imagine you have the border of Eretz Yisrael, and then at some point in time it semicircles inwards. So both sides. So let's say here it's straight, and in this middle part over here it arcs inwards. So you could have cities in the arc, which are technically geographically outside of Eretz Yisrael, but interestingly enough, kind of muvla, absorbed a little bit between the borders of Eretz Yisrael. So it is technically chutz la'aretz, but yet at the same time absorbed, so to speak, you understand, absorbed within the border, between the borders of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says, so therefore Abaye says what they're really arguing about over here is ayoros hasmuchos le'Eretz Yisrael. So case someone is going to be cities that are close to Eretz Yisrael, umuvlos bitchum Eretz Yisrael, and are absorbed within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, is what we're dealing with over here. So the Gemara says, Va'amar Rabba Bar Chana, and Rabba Bar Chana said, Lididi chaziliyahu asra, v'havi kemavi kumbila pumpadisa. So Rabba Bar Chana said, I saw these cities, right? Meaning I saw the distance between Kfar Ludim and Lelud. I saw the distance between Kfar Ludim and Lelud, and to me it looked like kemavi kubila pumpadisa. And to me, again, it looked like the short distance from Mabi Kubi, these were places, to Pumpadisa. So apparently, again, Mabi Kubi and Pumpadisa were right next to each other. And the distance between Kfar Ludim and Lelud was also very close to each other. Michlal de Tanakan Savar, Hani Lo Tzarch. Now, I will say, now I have to understand something. Anytime you see something added to an initial statement in the Mishnah, it sounds like, again, so let me give you this in a different way. The Tanakama said, right, the Mishnah began by saying, Hamevi get michutz la'aretz, min b'dinas hayam, somebody brings a gift from outside of Eretz Yisrael, sarach shiyomar b'fanei nechtaf or b'fanei nechtam. Fine. Then came along Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, Afilu mikfar ludim lelud. Right, even from Kfar Ludim. When Rabbi Eliezer says that, what does that make it sound like? Sounds like, according to the Tanakama, if you brought a get from Ludim to Lud, you would not have to go ahead and say B'fai Nechtam, B'fai Nechtam. And Rabbi Eliezer is saying, yes, you do. So Michlal the Tanakama Savar, Hani Lo Tzarech. So my love B'hai Kamifligi. What are they arguing about? Demar Savar Lefi Shein Bikiyin L'Shma V'Hani Gemiri. See, the Tanakama holds that the whole reason that you need b'fai nechtam is because of a din of lishma, and therefore again these guys in Kfar Ludim, because they are so close to Eretz Yisrael, therefore what they are bikiyin in lishma, and therefore you don't have to say it. Umar savar lefi she'ein eidin mitzuyin lakaimo, whereas Rabbi Eliezer will hold that it's an issue ultimately again of having eidin to testify about the veracity of the get. V'hani nami lo shchichi. And therefore what? Even though Kfar Ludim to Lud are close to each other, because one is in Chutz La'aretz and one is in Eretz Yisrael, travel may not be easy. And therefore, again, you need the Eidim to say B'fai Nechtam, B'fai Nechtam, essentially as Kiyim Shtaros to attest to the validity of the get, to which the Gemara says, lo, not necessarily. Rabba Metaritz L'Tamei, the Rav Metasava. Both say, both Rabba and Rava can interpret this Mishnah in accordance with their reasoning. So the Gemara says the following: Rabba Mataris L'Tamei. Rabba will interpret this according to his reasoning. D'chuli alma lefi she'in bikiyin l'shma. According to Rabba, he will say. According to Rabbi, he will say like this: everyone agrees that the reason for B'fai Nechtam is because in Chutz La'aretz they are not Bikiyin L'Shma. And here's what they're arguing about: Tanakama Savar Hani Kevan Dismuchos Migmar Gemiri. Rabbi said Tanakama holds that, let's say, from Kfar Ludim to Lud, there is no issue of L'Shma. Why? Because since Kfar Ludim is so close to Eretz Yisrael, anyone in such close proximity to Eretz Yisrael is also proficient in what? Is also proficient in the Shema. And therefore, again, according to the Tanakama, if you bring a get from Kfar Ludim to Lud, you need not say B'fanei Nechtav, B'fanei Nechtam. Va'asa Rabbi Gamliel L'meimar, and Rabbi Gamliel comes along and says, Muvlaos Gemiri, Smuchos Lo Gemiri. Rabbi Gamliel says like this: I agree with you, Tanakama, about Smuchos. Right? I agree with you to say that what? I'm sorry, it's just the opposite. Tanakama Savrahani Kevan Smuchos Migmar Gemiri. Vasar Gamliel Meimar Muvlaos Gemiri Smuchos Lo Gemiri. So Rabbi Gamliel argues. He says, I agree with your logic by Muvlaos. But remember, what are Muvlaos? Muvlaos are those cities in Chutz La'aretz inside the ark. Right? Inside the ark. So technically speaking, they're in Chutz La'aretz, but they're literally almost covered on all three sides by Eretz Yisrael. I agree, those cities we assume are Bikiyin L'Shma, but Smuchos are not necessarily Bikiyin L'Shma. Va'asa Rabbi Eliezer L'meimar Muvlaos Anamilo. And Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and he says, no, even cities inside the ark are also not considered to be Bikiyin L'Shma. Why? Shelo tachlok b'medinas hayam. Because we'll say Rabbi Eliezer's shita is, you can't start distinguishing between cities in Chutz La'aretz. If the city is in Chutz La'aretz, it's in Chutz La'aretz, and it needs to be treated that way. In other words, that all cities in Chutz La'aretz need to be given the same treatment. Namely, if you're in Chutz La'aretz, we assume that what? You're not Bikiyin L'Shma, and if you're not Bikiyin L'Shma, then L'maisa again, we have to say Fa'nechtam. Rav Mataris L'Tamei. Similarly, Rav will interpret this machlokis in accordance with his reasoning. T'chuli alma lefi shein edim suyin l'kaimo. Because remember, Rav's whole statement, Rav's whole shita is that it's a dinin ki im shtaros v'tanakama savar hani kevan dismuchos mishkach shrichi. See, I will say that Tanakama assumes that, let's say, from Kfar Ludim to Lud, you don't have to say Fa'nechtam. Why? Because if someone challenges the get, you're close enough to track down the Eidim. Va'asa Rabbi Gamliel comes along to say that no, Muvlos shchichi, Smuchos lo shchichi. If a Chutz La'aretz city is within the ark, then you could assume that yes, you'll be able to track down the Eidim if the validity of the get is challenged. But Smuchos, you can't assume that you'll be able to track down the Eidim. Therefore, you need to find Nechtam. Va'asa Rabbi Eliezer L'meimar. So Muvlos namilo shlo tachlo b'medinas hayam. Rabbi say, according to both Rabba and Rava, so Rabbi Eliezer has the same basic shita, and that shita is what? That shita is that Lamaisa, you can't make a distinction in Chutz La'aretz. Chutz La'aretz is Chutz La'aretz, and therefore again Lamaisa, you have to treat all lands in Chutz La'aretz the same way. Tanan. So we'll say, okay, so therefore what we've just done over here is we've shown that Rabba and Rava both have their own understanding and version of the machlokis in the Mishnah. Next, now we learned in the Mishnah, the Chachamim say, Eino tzarech sheyomar b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. So remember again, we learned in the Mishnah, the Chachamim hold that you don't have to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam, ella hamevi mimedinas hayam v'hamolech. So we'll say this is another interesting idea. So the Mishnah also quoted the sheet of the Chachamim. The Chachamim say that the only person who has to say b'fanei nechtam or b'fanei nechtam is one who takes the get from Medina, from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. That's right. Hamevi Medinas Hayam v'hamolech. Molech means someone who's what? Taking a get from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. Now remember, the Tanakama never made mention of that case. All the Tanakama mentioned was Hamevi get mimedinas hayam. That's all the Tanakama mentioned. So the Chachamim are adding in this case of Hamolich. So it says the Gemara, Michlal, the Tanakama Savar, Molich Lo. We could infer from this that the Tanakama holds that one who takes the get from Eretz Yisrael, one who takes the get from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz does not have to say V'fai My lad v'hakam efki. So both say, what are the Tanakama and the Chacham arguing about? Demar Savar Lefi Shem Mikim L'Shma. So I will say, Pashtos, the Tanakama holds that the whole reason for what? The whole reason for V'fai nechtam is because of Ein Bikian L'Shma, is because ultimately, again, they're not proficient in L'Shma. Therefore, again, that idea only applies where? From Chutz La'aretz, Teretz Yisrael, but doesn't apply from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. V'hani Amud Beis, V'hani Gemiri. And in Eretz Yisrael, if the get originates in Eretz Yisrael, there's no problem of Lishma, and therefore there's no need for B'fanei Nechtam. Umar Savrin the Chachamim will hold Lefi She'ein Eidim Mitzuyin L'Kaimo, because ultimately, again, the Eidim are not there, the Eidim are not present to go ahead and uphold the get. Again, remember, in the event that the get is challenged, the Eidim may not be there to be able to defend the validity of the get. V'hani nami lo shchichi. If that's the major concern, that concern applies even for a get being written in Eretz Yisrael and being taken to Chutz La'aretz. To which the Gemara says, Rabba mataris l'tamei, v'Rava mataris l'tamei. In reality, says the Gemara, both Rabba and Rava just have their own shitos. So says the Gemara, each of them could interpret in accordance with their own opinions. So the Gemara says, Rabba mataris l'tamei. Rabba interprets in accordance with his own opinion. D'chuli alma lefi she'ein bikian l'shma. So both say, so now understand what's happening over here. What the Gemara, I should explain this before. What the Gemara was trying to do in the last two machlokim in the Mishnah is to go ahead and make the machlokis in the Mishnah about the machlokis Rabba and Rava. That's really what the underlying machlokis. So, for example, over here you have a Tanakama. The Tanakama, which is the first opinion quoted in the Mishnah, only speaks about a case of a get being brought from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. Never discusses a case of a get being taken from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. And the Tanakama says if you bring a get from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, you have to say B'fanei Nechtav or B'fanei Nechtam. You have to say the get was written and signed in my presence. On the other hand, the Chachamim add in the case of Hamolich. The Chachamim add in the case of not only someone who takes a get from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, but also someone who takes a get from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara says, why do the Chacham add in that case and the Tanakama does not? So the Gemara's reflexive reaction to that is they're probably arguing about the very reason for B'fai Nechtam. So the Tanakama is of the opinion that the reason is L'shma. If the reason is L'shma, so that only requires me to say B'fai Nechtam when? With a get that originates in Chutz La'aretz. But if a get is written in Eretz Yisrael, there's no concern about L'shma, therefore no problem. On the other hand, Tanakama holds, the Chachamim will hold that it's a din in Eidin Mitzuyin L'kaimo. It's a din in ultimately upholding the get, and therefore L'maisa, again, that applies wherever the get is written. To which the Gemara says no. See, Abba said nobody likes that because remember, both Rabba and Rava want to be able to interpret the Mishnah in total accordance with their own opinions, right? So therefore, again, neither wants to yield authorship, or I should say, authorship of the Mishnah to the other. Therefore, says the Gemara, Rava metaris latamei, Rava metaris latamei. Both Rabba and Rabba could interpret the Mishnah in accordance with their opinions. So listen to this. Dechuli alma. Rabba metaris. We'll start with Rabba. Rabba metaris latamei. Dechuli alma lafi shem b'kiyin l'shma. So everyone will agree that the issue in B'fai Nechtam is that people are not proficient in Lishma. V'hacha b'gzeras molich atu mevi kamiflegi. Rabbi say, what are they arguing about? There's a concern that maybe we should require a get no matter what its point of origin, to always require b'fanei nechtam. Essentially, why? Because if you don't require it in all cases, people won't do it in the necessary cases. So we're going to legislate that even a get that originates in Eretz Yisrael and goes to Chutz La'aretz should also have b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam, lest you forget to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam in a case of where it's coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says, the Tanakama savar lo gazrina molech ma'atu mevi. The Tanakama is not worried about that. He does not say you have to say b'fanei nechtam u'b'fanei nechtam in Eretz Yisrael get, lest you come to forget to say it in a Chutz La'aretz get. V'rabbanan b'asrai, but the Chachamim say no, savri goes savri kazrinan molech atu mevi. On the other hand, the Chachamim will say no, we'll make you say b'fanei nechtam and an Eretz Yisrael get, right? In order to ensure that what? You say it, or lest you forget to say it in a Chutz La'aretz get. Rava will interpret this according to his reasoning. Everyone in the Mishnah is going to agree that the reason for Nechtam is in order to go ahead and uphold the document. And the Chachamim are coming to go ahead and interpret the view of the Tanakama. Others will say that Lamaisa, again, the Rabbanon Basrai, the Chachamim, are just fully expounding the view of the Tanakama. The Tanakama kind of gave us his view shorthand, that Hamivi get me Medina Asiyam Tzark Shom Farnechtam, but in reality the Tanakama also meant to say that even in the case of where you're bringing a get from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, you also have to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Why, Rabbosai? Because this is not a din of lishma. What is this a din of? This is a din, ultimately, again, of eidin mitzuyin l'kaimo, of making sure that there are witnesses who are able to attest to the veracity of the get, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, no matter where the point of origin is, you have to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Next, Tanan. Hamevi get memedinas, hamemedina lemedina, bemedinas hayam. If one brings a get from one place to another place, literally Medina literally means a country, but lav dafkid has to mean a country. One province to another province in Medinas Hayam. Sarech lomar. Sarech lomar, a person has to say, b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. So a person has to say, it was written and it was signed in my presence. Ha. I will say, what can you infer from there? It's only from one Medina to another Medina that you have to say b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam, but yet within the same Medina you don't have to. So l'Rava necha, l'Rabba kasha. So according to Rava, that makes sense. Why does it make sense according to Rava? Because according to Rava, what's the whole point of b'fanei nechtam? Eidim mitzuyin l'kaimo. So I understand why, if it's Osa Medina, if it's within the same country, there's no concern, because the witnesses will be readily available to go ahead and uphold the get if it's challenged. According to Rabbah, however, who holds that it's an issue of lishma, you should have to go ahead and say v'farnechtam even within the same Medina in Medina Sayam. Lo, so the Gemara says, Lo. I'm sorry. So the Rava Nechel, the Rava Kasha, to which the Gemara says, Lo tema ha ba'osa b'medina ba'osa b'medina sayam lo tzarech. So says the Gemara, don't necessarily make the inference from that statement that within the same Medina in Chutz La'aretz you would not have to say it. Rather, make the following inference: Ela ema. Medina leMedina be'eretz Yisrael lo tzarech. Say rather the inference is that from one Medina to another Medina in Eretz Yisrael, you would not have to say b'fanei nechtam. To which the Gemara says, you don't need to make that inference. Ha behedja katanila. Rabbi say that is stated explicitly. Hamevi get be'eretz Yisrael. Eino tzarech lomar b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. Rabbi say that's stated explicitly in the Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, Imeahi. Now I'll tell you why that's not good, because if you are learning out from that statement, Hava Amina Hanimili Di'eved. I would have thought that's only b'diavad, that if a person delivered a get with an Eretz Yisrael and didn't say v'fainechtam, b'diavad it's kosher. Aval lechatchila lo, but lechatchila you should say v'fainechtam. Therefore, again, kamash malon, that is not the case. That even lechatchila in Eretz Yisrael, if you're delivering the get from one Medina to another Medina within Eretz Yisrael, you need not say b'fainechtav u b'fainechtam. V'ika demosiv la hachi. And there are some that interpret this in the following way: Ha medina le'medina be'eretz Yisrael lo tzarich. And I will say others interpret this to mean that if you were so I will say others interpret it the following: Ha medina be'eretz Yisrael lo tzarich. That we could infer from that previously stated statement that from one Medina to another Medina Eretz Yisrael you don't have to say v'fainechtam. Well, if that's the case, l'Rabba necha l'Rabba kasha. I will say according to Rabba that makes perfect sense. Why? Because since you're in Eretz Yisrael, there is no din of lishma. Or I should say not there's no din. There's no problem of lishma. But for Rava, this would pose a kasha. Because Rava say you could have a situation, as the Gemara will discuss, where even within Eretz Yisrael, you have a problem with free travel between one part and another, and therefore, again, edim might not be available to uphold the get. To which the Gemara says, Lo tema me medina le medina be'eretz Yisrael. Lo tzarech. Don't make the inference from one Medina to another Medina that you don't need b'fanei or fainechtam. Ela ima haba'osa Medina b'Medina sayam lo tzarech. Rather make this is just the reverse of the conversation we just had. Rather, just go ahead and say that the inference is from one Medina to another Medina in Medina sayam. You don't have to say fainechtam. Avaba Medina b'Medina be'eretz Yisrael my tzarech. But from one Medina to another Medina Yisrael, you would have to say fainechtam. To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, listni hamevi mi Medina le Medina stam. Then why don't you just make the statement in the Mishnah of hamevi mi Medina le Medina sarach shiyomer fainechtam? And that would tell me what? Whether I'm bringing in Eretz Yisrael, whether I'm bringing in a Chutz La'aretz, I have to say, but fainechtam. To which the Gemara says, li'olam mi Medina le Medina be'eretz Yisrael nami lo tzarich. In reality, says the Gemara, if I'm bringing it from Medina to Medina in Eretz Yisrael, I don't have to say b'fainechtam. I'm sorry. If I'm bringing it from Medina to Medina in Eretz Yisrael, I don't have to say b'fainechtav or fainechtam. We'll say, why not? Now, this is very important. See, Rabbi say, if you hold that it's a problem of lishma, I understand why I don't have to go ahead and bring. Shkoyach. We'll say we have another late-breaking sponsor. So, Menashe and Bracha Efron, for the second time this week, Baruch Hashem, sponsoring today's shir in celebration of the engagement of their son, Ben Sion, to Alana Sperling. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. A grandson and an engagement in 1 week. Baruch Hashem. Good week for the Efrons. Mazel Tov. Wedding should happen b'shat tova u'metzlachos. I believe the Kala is a student of mine of Ma'alot. Right, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Sorry, back to our regularly scheduled program. So remember again, if you hold that it's a din of lishma, so remember again, there is never an issue. Ultimately, again, I'm in Medina le-Medina be'eretz Yisrael. However, if you hold that it's Eidim Mitzuyin L'Kaimo, so then there could be an issue again. There could be an issue of Medina le-Medina even Eretz Yisrael. We'll say, we're going to discuss this, by the way. You wonder to yourself, where would there ever be a problem of Eidim Mitzuyin L'Kaimo if you're in Eretz Yisrael? So first of all, again, Eretz Yisrael is not such a small place, right? Not such a small place. You could have an issue, again, I'm in the north, the Eidim are in the south. Remember, Gemara is also going to discuss, let's say, in the times of Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael, where, again, I will say, there was restricted travel between the two monarchies, or absolutely you could have an issue between the Kaimo. So watch this. The Gemara says, Kevan di'ika ole regalim mishkach shrichi. But Rabbi say again, even Medina le-Medina be'eretz Yisrael, there's always ole regel. So Rabbi say, so remember, because there's always ole regel, what does that mean? there are always people traveling to the center of the country. Remember, Yerushalayim is the center of the country. So there's always people traveling to the center of the country. So because of that, there's not really a concern of Eidin Mitsuyin L'Kaimo. Why? Because even if you have a question about the get, so you have 3 times over the year where you're pretty sure that what? The people who signed on that get will be somewhere near the center of the country. You have the opportunity to validate the get. Teinach bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim. That makes sense while the Beis Hamikdash is standing. Bizman shein Beis Hamikdash kayim ma'ikal ameimar. When the Beis Hamikdash unfortunately is no longer standing, what is there to say? Oh, Kevan deika bate dinen dekvi mishkach chichi. We'll say one of the takanos of Ezra was that there should be bate dinin dekvuin. Rashi says bate dinin dekvuin ba'yoros kitakanos Ezra b'sheni behei u'mitzuyo shera shalchus lo dur makom vad. So we'll say because there are established bate dinim and because the bate din operate on Mondays and Thursdays, therefore there's always a flow of traffic within Eretz Yisrael itself. Therefore, there's never a concern that you won't be able to track down the Eidim. Tanan. So we'll say the Mishnah said, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, afilu mehegmonia lehegmonia. Reb Shimon Gamliel said, even from one hegmonia, so we'll say hegmonia literally means like a monarchy, from one monarchy to the next. V'am Rabbi Yitzchak, ir achas haisa be'Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yitzchak said, there was a city in Eretz Yisrael, v'asasios shema, its name was Asasios, v'hayu ba, Beis Hegmonios Shayu Makpidin Alzeh. And within this one city, there were 2 monarchs, bless you, that were makpid one on the other. Well, so what does it mean they were makpid one on the other? That they did not allow free travel between their 2 monarchies. Leficha chutzruchu lomar megmonia lehegmonia. Therefore, again, Chazal were forced to say that even if you bring a get from one hegmonia to another hegmonia, you have to say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. L'Rava necha. So we'll say, according to Rava, this statement makes sense. Why does it make sense? Because since there's a travel restriction, then what? We'll say, what are we concerned about? That if the get is challenged, you won't be able to track down the witnesses to be able to validate the get itself. Therefore, I have to say b'fanei nechtam as we're validating the get now. L'Rabba kasha. But Rabbi, according to Rabbi, this is a kasha. Rabbi say, why is kasha according to Rabbi? Rabbi holds what? Rabbi holds what? L'shma. So remember again, where is all of this taking place? Eretz Yisrael. If that's the case, l'shma shouldn't be a problem. To which Gemara will say, this is going to blow you away. Rabbi islay de Rava. So this is amazing. We've just spent the last 3 days discussing this. To which Gemara says, you know what, the truth is, Rabbi really agrees with Rava. The Rabbi will say, now what does that mean? So take a look at Rashi. Rabba islay de Rava, de Medina le Medina B'Eretz Yisrael, heicha de kapti v'lo shlichi edim sarich lemeimar. I will say that in reality, Rava agrees that even in a situation where there is no concern for lishma, for example in Eretz Yisrael, but there is a clear issue of restriction on travel or inability to travel freely, Rabba will agree with Rava that you need witnesses to say befanei nechtav u befanei nechtam. To which the Gemara says, Sarach lemeimar aval Rava lesle dirabba the shchichi edim lo kashimli mikian to kulu bekian. So what the Gemara now is suggesting is that lamaisa again, Rabba holds like Rava that einachinami. If you have a situation where lamaisa again, there is no concern for lishma, but there will be a concern for restricted travel. That lamaisa, even Rabba will agree they have to say fanachto fanachtam. Rashi just points out over here, Rava does not hold like Rabba, because Rava holds that in general everyone is versed in the laws of Lishma. To which the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Elamai benayu. So Rabbi say, what are the nafkamina cases between Rabba and Rabba then? I'll tell you what the nafkamina cases are. The Asyul Beitrei, where Rabbi say again, so remember, if you have 2 witnesses who bring the get together from Chutz territory. So remember, according to Rava, because there are 2, you don't need b'fanechta b'fanechtam. According to Rabba, you do need b'fanechta b'fanechtam. Why? Because you still have a din of l'shma. Inami ba'osa medina b'medina sayam. Furthermore, the second nafkamina case will be what Rabbi say, a case where Lemaisa they're bringing it within the same country but it was same Medina, same province in Chutz La'aretz. According to Rabba, you don't need Farnechtam. Why? Because since it's the same province, again, if there's a question about the get, you'll be able to track down the witnesses. According to Rabba, however, because it's Chutz La'aretz, there's still a problem of Lishma, and therefore you still need Farnechtam. But so let's just go a little bit weiter. Tanan. Medinas Hayam We'll say it's another interesting case. There's a Mishnah later on we'll see. If one brings a get from Medinas Hayam and for whatever reason is unable to say now we're going to say, what does that mean you're unable to say? We'll see it in just a moment. As long as there are witnesses signed on the get, Yiskayim b'chosamav. And Rashi says, Yavo hamakirim hachasima v'kasher. As long as people come forward who recognize the get, who recognize the signatures, the get could be upheld by the signatures and Shalom Yisrael. To which the Gemara says, Mai ve'eno yochel lomar. What does that mean? What does that mean that we'll say the case over here is the person who's bringing the get doesn't have the ability to say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. Top of Hamad Aleph. What does that mean? He doesn't have the ability to say it. Ilei mecherish. Maybe you want to say he's a deaf mute. So cherish bar esuye gitu is a cherish able to bring the get to begin with. V'hatanan we learned hakol kishirim lahavi esaget. Everyone is kosher to bring a get. Chutz mecheresh shota v'katan. With the exception of I have a cherish, a shota, and a katan. A cherish is a deaf mute. Shota is someone who's deranged, mentally unstable, and a katan is a minor. So we'll say these people, because remember, I'll say this is not a chiddush by get. Remember, the case over here by get is you're appointing a shaliach lo'olacha. A shaliach has to have capacity. Without capacity, you can't be a shaliach. To which the Gemara says, "Va'amar Rav Yosef, hacham ayaskinon." What's the case? This is actually a very interesting case. Kigon shenasna lo kishupi keach, v'lo hispik lomar b'faynechta faynechtam ad shenischaresh. I will say, listen to this case, and with this we'll stop. I'll leave you a little bit on a cliffhanger. The Gemara says, what's the case over here? The case over here is where the get was given to someone who had who had absolute capacity. Absolute capacity. He was fine. And then Nebuch, something happened to him on the way. He became a deaf mute. So by the time he went ahead and he showed up in Eretz Yisrael, he no longer has the ability to go ahead and what? To say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. He no longer has the ability to do so. So therefore, again, what did the Mishnah rule in such a case? The Mishnah paskind that it's okay. We'll just uphold the get to the signatures that are there. Rabbi, let me just read one more line, then we'll stop. L'Rava necha, l'Rabba kashya. Rabbi, according to Rava, this works perfectly. Because according to Rava, what are we saying? Look, normally we like to uphold the signatures on the shtar by saying what? B'fanei nechta, b'fanei nechtam. But it knew if you can't do it, you can't do it. So we'll have to find another way to uphold the signatures. But according to Rabbah, this is a major kasha. Why? Because according to Rabbah, the fine nechtam has nothing to do with the signatures, but it's an attestation, right? It's testimony. It's testimony to the lishma nature of the get. If I don't have the lishma nature of the get, ultimately, how is the get to be kosher? Rabbah said to be continued tomorrow. Acquired deafness.
So you can show him a question.
Oh, so good. So we'll see. We'll see other ways. See.